Okay, so this is, I just want to do a little bit of, an overview of the weekend project. You could obviously look at the code, you could grab it and see what's going on. And again, the idea was that, let me actually even see if I have this deployed. Should be this guy. Again, if it's running, yeah, Heroku's running into all kinds of problems. But basically, what you're looking at here is one thing that's important is that if you're drilling down, I can't believe I don't have this on. No one said it. Well, as this is warming up, any outstanding issues? And were people generally able to get this thing to work? Yeah. I mean, again, this was a focus on understanding many-to-many relationships. And again, my philosophy really is that if you understand a has one and belongs to, then if you have a join entity, then you'll understand many-to-many, because that's strictly just having those same relationships on the join entity. So again, in our example that we would take a look at, if we have three models, where you have a user, we have a department, and we have a user department, we end up getting the many-to-many by specifying that a user department belongs to a user, and a user department belongs to a department, and a user has many user departments, right? So again, this gives us the ability of having that many-to-many relationship where, in essence, a user has many departments, the department can have many users. Again, so some people had asked about using the sequelize belongs to many. I don't use it that much, so I couldn't really tell you all that much about the syntax, but under the covers, it's doing the exact same thing, I'm sure, with just using these relationships.
So when you do this, you're pulling the data. Do you pull all your departments with the include and then pull the stuff without it, or do you just pull everything?
It's a great question. I mean, it really, really depends. I mean, look, I think one thing that drives these things is that, what you do is you set up what you want your application to look like. And you look at that, and that's going to give you an indication of, what your routes are going to look like and what data that you end up, needing for your routes. So there's no easy answer to it because, again, the problem is that get the data that you need. That's what it ends up coming down to. I mean, if you really want to build a sort of generic, we have a generic API at work. And that generic API at work says, hey, look, here's the model that we want to get, and we can put on the URL string, hey, look, this is what, we want you to include. But you have to be, look, in real-world applications, as we start to dig in a little bit, you'll see that, sometimes you don't want to expose a ton of data or allow, users to end up doing that. So the real answer is it depends what you need. I mean, you're going to get the data that you need. There are different ways that you could end up getting it. I mean, so for instance, if you had a list of, the users and you had a list of the departments, and for each user, you had a collection of user departments, and all you ended up having was the ID for that department, okay? You could always go and get the name of that department from that department ID. I mean, you would have that data at that point for your template. But you might want to say, hey, look, here's my user. Ilya is my user. Ilya has a collection of user departments. And I want to loop over each of those user departments to get not just the department ID, but to get the name of the department as well. And if that's what you want, then you're doing what we've seen, which is doing a nested include. Okay? But don't go nuts with it. I mean, figure out what you want, and don't assume, hey, look, I need everything right away. You'll say, look, wait a second. I've got a user here. I've got a list of user departments, but I do want to have that department name. I don't have it. I just have a department ID. Okay, I know what I need to do. I need to do an include there. So the thing is, again, just sort of take it sort of one step at a time as you're doing this. And with this, there are probably a couple of different ways to do it. One thing that I sort of want you to understand is that, if you were to go and even start working on a project, I mean, odds are if you're working in this sort of stack, they are going to be using some sort of ORM like SQLize. And again, you would probably have a lot more files that are here. But in the end, the different models would probably be separated in different files with this sort of structure, right? They would be defined this way. So, again, one thing that you'll see here is that you should be able to when you're looking at someone's code, you should be at this point to be able to play a little bit of, detective work and say, well, all right, again, maybe starting off from here. Again, there's a specific reason why I, set it up in this structure, right? I just have my sort of database connection object, which again, I end up using really all over the place because that's my SQLize object that's going to allow me to define my models. It's also going to allow me to sync and do that sort of thing. But, assuming that that this is there, then coming in and, drilling into something like, take this, the simplest one, right? Drilling into something like department. All that's doing, this file is very, very specific. All it's doing is defining what a department is. And this is as simple as the only way that this could get simpler with SQLize would be to get rid of line 4, right? In fact, you would still have a model, but you would basically just have the created at, updated at, fields, that sort of thing. So, again, you want to sort of play the part of detective when you're looking at this or you're going through code. Again, you're going to end up working on projects where you didn't end up writing the code. And the idea of going in there and being able to actually look and say, I don't necessarily, if you're writing it, I want you to understand it. Okay? You look at someone else's code base. Again, if it's my code base and it's something that we put together, you should understand every line too. But very often you can open up a project. Again, you're getting a sort of lay of the land of what's going on. If you open this up and you saw, a ton of things in here, even at this stage of the game, you could make some sort of judgment to say, hey, look, maybe there's something too much going on here. Now, by the way, I was going to do something with this. I was going to have the idea of a primary user department, so a user could have multiple departments, but they have a primary one. I didn't end up doing anything with it, but this just was sort of left in there as an artifact. But again, that's where you could say, hey, look, there is this sort of many-to-many relationship, but not all of those many-to-manys, right? Not all of those users, departments are all the same. One of them is going to be a special department. So, the one model to, and again, the other thing is like if you're going to start looking at something, you're going to look at a project, start with the models, right? Because the models are going to give you an idea. Hopefully, the models are going to be named correctly. They're not going to name their models X, Y, and Z, right? They're going to name their models what their entities are. And again, if you look at this, you say, all right, I got an idea. And the more properties that you have, the more it'll be obvious what these things are. If this really was a user model, you end up having things like first name and last name and email and date of birth and whatever other information that you have there for some sort of employee. So again, my idea here was basically just to give you some experimenting with instance methods, and I had a real strong opinion here that even though you could create instance methods that could end up returning promises and that would be asynchronous, I wanted to use these instance methods in my views, in my Swig views. If I want to use them in my views, there's no promises that are involved here. I can't say to Swig, hey Swig, here's my data, but hey, wait, data's not really ready yet. Here's my data, here's my template. Once I hand it off to Swig, right, there's no more promises, right? Everything has to be resolved. So these are just basically these, they could go anywhere, but it's not a bad spot for them to be. And again, what I'm doing here is just saying, hey, look, if you're going to call these methods, do me a favor, just make sure you populate the user departments first, because there's no use asking for these things if you haven't done that. And So these are just 4 different methods that tell you, does the user have all the departments? Do they have no departments? Given a department, do they have the department? And also, if I give a department, the only reason I did this is that I wanted to do, I wanted to really sort of, I try as much as I can to stick to that RESTful routing philosophy. So to say that when I do a delete, it's going to be on users, the ID of the user departments, and the ID of the user department. And that's why this was just a way of saying, hey, look, given a department, I want to go and I want to find that user department, right? And if in fact I find them, I want to get that ID. Just purely something that's a utility. I would much rather my logic is here. This logic I can stick in a route too. Okay? Why do I want it here? Why is it best to put the logic here as opposed to somewhere else? Do you remember? Easier to test. I mean, and again, it is business logic that's related to the user. So this is a good place to have it. And again, SQLize knows that you might want to have these instance methods, so they give you a very convenient place to have it.
What is the difference, other than just, what is, let me ask the question first. What is the difference between an instance, a get method, or a class method, other than you just intellectually want to put it, you want to have things that have to do with rows, as opposed to the database in an instance method? Is there some technical difference?
No, there's a big difference, right? I mean, let's take an example here. Let's go back to foundations, right? Because again, this doesn't have to be. This is not really even a SQLize question. If we end up thinking about, our idea of having a person class, and we have something that we end up passing, let's just say we're going to pass a name, and we'll say this dot name equals name, and I could go over here and I could say prof equals new person prof, and I'll go up here and we'll say console.clear, and if we end up doing console.log prof, we'll see that I'll find the prof. Now this is a stupid example, but let's say that we actually wanted to have a method on a person to ask the person if, in fact, they are the professor, right? Well, one of the things that JavaScript allows us to do is to have prototype properties to say person.prototype, we'll say is prof, and this will be a function, and we'll just return this dot name is equal to prof. And now if we go over here and we say prof is prof, we end up getting true. That's an instance method. Okay? That's an instance method. That's how you do instance methods with JavaScript. Okay? The way that you do instance methods with SQLize is by using the instance methods. Now, if there was something that we wanted to put on a person object, we wanted to do something like person, say hi. And let's say we wanted to do something, we can do anything we want here. I mean, we could say console.log hello. And if I go over here and I say person, say hi, it's going to say it's going to be hello, right? That would be the equivalent of a class method. Okay? So class methods can be anything you want them to be, right? You can do anything. Now look, the reason why I would imagine, right, the reason why you would want to have a class method in SQLize is because you probably want to do some interaction with whatever table that SQLize object is wrapping around, right? So for instance, if we found that we were doing a lot of this business logic, as an example, a simplistic example. you know, we wanted to do something so that when we ended up, good class method. I don't know. Let's say we want to find all the users by a specific department, and we were sort of tired of like putting our where clause in there or that sort of thing. Nothing would prevent us from. And look at this. I passed on my thing. We'll have to take a look at that. That's going to be interesting. Nothing would prevent us from having a class method here that basically allowed me to say, hey, look, my class method is going to be find all by department name. Let's keep it simple, right? And so basically, if you realize, hey, look, when I find the users by department name, I got to find the users. I have to include the user department. From the user department, I have to include the department. And I got, you know, it's a lot of work, right? If you're doing that all over your application, or you find yourself doing that a lot, saying, hey, look, I want to have this way of doing this, you can set it up as a class method. So I mean, the question is you have to think about things in terms of how your application is being used. These were methods that I decided I wanted to use when I was doing my templating in my view, and that's how they ended up coming into being. I mean, they were based totally off each of these individual users. So that's why they end up becoming instance methods. Okay? Again, if they're operating on if it's related to what would end up being a row in the table. Now again, we always make that distinction, big model and little model, right? Our big model is our DB define. We end up getting back user. Our little model is when we end up doing a user.find all. We get a bunch of the little models back, the instances, okay? Or if we end up doing user create, little model. I always think like, you know, little u instead of big U. Big U for the you know, actual model, and a little u for what would be an instance of that model. Now, you know, once, you know, that's sort of a lot of the meat is in this. So once you end up having that, and by the way, this was actually one where there was a fair amount of work that you really had to do on the view, right? It was a fair amount of work. I mean, again, depending on what order you end up doing it in, and this is why these things are, you can go into whatever order you're comfortable with. You could create a couple of routes, get things to display the way you want them to display, okay? Look, you know what your end goal is. Your end goal is to basically show all the users, show all the departments, create users, create departments, and to be able to add users to departments, right? That's basically the extent of the application. Go ahead, you had a question?
So in your database index,
Mhm.
DB index,
Yes, yeah, I didn't really show that too much.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
if you go all the way down to your export, you export the models directly. Is there any reason you don't use the SQLized top models?
I don't like it. I mean, I feel like anyone that is going to use this, okay? I don't have to know anything about SQLized. They don't have to know what my models are. Someone who's using this in a route, okay? Why let that SQLized bleed over? Let's say I decide to use a different ORM, okay? I hate that idea of other parts of the application, other than different models, actually going in and saying DB models, right, and actually grabbing a different model. You're anywhere else in the application outside the models, okay? You're the models. This is what you use. Okay?
You do some requires for each of those guys.
Well, I end up.
Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is that I want to expose exactly what I want to expose. In other words, I don't want to, you know, I've seen this in the workshop, the idea of like exposing that my underscore DB object. I don't want to expose that. I don't want to expose that. Okay? I just want to use that. I want to use that here. It's fine for me to do this here, but notice that this DB object that's here, notice it ain't going anywhere. I'm not doing anything with it. No one has access to it. I mean, someone could grab it if they wanted to grab it. You know, there was something in some of the workshops where you actually had to go, you know, there was code of saying, hey, look, I need to include these models here, you know, or else the models won't end up getting defined. I don't know if you remember seeing that. With this structure, you don't have that issue. Okay? Your entree into the DB is this index. That's what you get. Okay? No one has to worry about it. You're working with other people. They're working with other routes. Say, all right, we'll just do a require for that DB. And if you did a console.log for the models, you'd see what models were available. You can always come back and say, hey, look, I noticed there's this other model. How come you didn't export that model? Well, I forgot to export it. Let's export it, right? But imagine if you didn't end up exporting it and someone did a require, and they could go in and do a require of this DB object here, somewhere in a route or wherever they wanted to do it. They could end up pulling in that DB object, and they could go in and start, querying the models from that DB object. But my take is, why have them do it? Just export the models that they're going to end up using. It's a really nice, clean structure. Again, other ways to do it, but just pick something and stick with it. I don't like the idea of bleeding over exactly what my ORM is to other parts of my application.
So, to make sure I understand what you just said,
Mm-hmm.
if you go into your routes, you won't see DB.
That's exactly right.
You'll see your models only.
Or you'll see DB dot models, which are the models that I'm exporting. And by the way, I noticed, I know that you're going to look at that and you're going to, it is a little bit confusing. And maybe the next time I go through this, I will do a different naming. But, I mean, the point is, if you do look here, you'll see what I'm getting at here is that this DB object, which is my sequelized DB object, that you won't see. Again, what people are doing is that they're going to be doing a requiring of this DB object, and I expose my models through this models property. Yeah. Again, you can debate whether or not it sort of makes sense, but the second I see that, I have to include this models file here, because if I don't do it and no one ever includes that model file, then those models will not be part of my system. That's what sort of scares me. That's not a good system. This is a much cleaner way of doing things, in my opinion. So, once you end up doing that, then you can start to take a look at, the routes. The routes become, fairly simplistic. I mean, the department's route is, really, 20 lines of code. If you end up looking at this, we are, grabbing our models. So we get, we can get our models from up here. Our models are coming from our DB object, the models property. And again, the other reason why I do like it is that it doesn't matter, if I was using that sequelize models, okay? If I decided to name my tables in lowercase, it would be models.users in lowercase. I don't like that. I like when the models have an uppercase property, and I don't want to be dependent on putting that in the database. That's another reason why I sort of like doing this. It's very clear, right? It's, I can grab my department, models.department, big D, right? Models user department, capital U, right? User department. When I go to do I don't even have a GET request here. When I go to do a post here, okay, all I'm doing is creating this, I'm getting it then, I'm doing a redirect back, okay? When I end up, I have a catch here for next. When I go to do delete, again, the idea here is that you have these dependencies. There's other ways to do it, but this is basically, if I want to kill the parent off, I have to kill the child records off first, right? So again, one before the other. That's where you have that, the difference between, things have to be sequential as opposed to doing them at the same time. So, here, use a department destroy, right? When the department ID is this, and then I can destroy the department, and then I go back to this. So, two routes, again, would they be the first routes that I wrote? It'd be tricky if they were the first routes I ended up writing. Probably the route that I would write first is going to be my homepage route. And again, you've seen this before. At least this is, my style at this point, is that if I look at And I actually broke this down. I broke my app down and my server down so I could do some testing. But here, this is defining my Express app. This is all stuff that you've ended up, seeing before. Here's my, my data for the homepage, which is basically, go and again, I want it to order by the name of the user, and I want to include the user departments for that user. And what I'm doing here is I'm getting, all the users, right, with their user departments, and also it's probably not showing up on here. And the other one is that, so there's two different things. And with these two pieces of data, that's really all the information that I end up needing for my UI. I don't really even have to nest that far down here. All I need to do is say, look, I really need to get the user departments for all of my users. And I also need to find all the departments as well. And that would probably be what I would start out with. And if we now go in and we look at, with that information, right, knowing that, okay, I've got a user with their user departments, and I've got all the departments, then if you went in and you started looking at the views, and here, the only thing that I tried to do here is that instead of actually having everything on one page, just to sort of break it down so that it's going to be maintainable. I mean, if you sort of look at this, what this allows me to do is that I do an include, so I've got a form for where I'm inserting a new department, where I'm inserting a new user form. I've got an include for my departments list. I've got an include for my user list. All I'm trying to do here, so I don't have this big monolithic HTML page. I could, format this, make sure it looks good. I mean, if we took it the most simplistic one here, let's look at the user form, right? All the user form is going to be a post to users. The only thing that I need is going to be the username. All you need to create a user. If I end up looking at the post for departments, right, really the exact same thing. So the idea that you can sort of break these things up into pieces, the reason why that's good is that you have someone that's doing a lot of some of the other CSS, the HTML for you, they could work on it. It's a lot clearer. You can sort of take out, separate out your code. Now, what gets a little bit more complex is that if we end up looking at, well, departments list is not all that complicated, right? Departments list is basically just looping over the departments that I've actually passed down to this template. And I'm just looping over them, and for each of these, I'm creating doing a department name, and I've got my delete button, and if you remember, I've got department / department name. I'm using method override, right, so that my routes are what? RESTful. Right, they make sense. I look at that route, it's not a post. Posts create things, okay? If I look at my routes, my route is going to be a delete. Where does it, where do I expect to be deleting departments? / departments, right? Delete method is going to end up deleting the department.
So when you make a new association, would that be a put or a post? Because you're updating the object.
When if you end up, so it depends on what you're doing. What I would say is that if you're adding a user to a department, what I would say is that you're creating. And what you're creating is that you're creating a user department. Right? You could look at it a couple different ways, but in the end, you can start to think about what's happening in your database. A row is getting added to the database. That's why I would end up, calling it a post. Again, if you can make, look, sometimes routes do get a little bit more complicated, but just try to do it so that you can almost, again, you should really be able to guess. If you know what the entities are, you should almost be able to guess what the routes are. Okay? So these three are fairly simplistic. The one that gets to be a little bit more complicated, and again, I just also broke this up, as well, what you can do with Swig and with most templating engines. And what this really does is that you're looping over each of the user and users, and now I can do an include, and I could do it just for this user item. And out of all the ones that were here, right? This for sure has the most that's going on here, right? And again, any number of ways that you can do the swig is not the best templating engine. It's a little bit of a drag to work with. But here, you know, I'm saying, hey, look, I mean, the one thing you could say about this is that you could look at this and it's pretty readable, right? You could look at this and say, all right, well, I guess the class that I'm using, if the user has all the departments, I've got the departments, I've got the user, okay? Or if they have no departments, right? I could do all, or I end up doing none here. You could also, you know, see here, this is the username, right? And here, I'm just looping over. So this, you know, this could be a little bit tricky of how you do it, right? But in the end, what I want to do for every user, I want to show all the departments, okay? All the departments, and I want to have different functionality based on the fact whether the user has that department or not. So for every user that ends up coming in here, I end up looping over the departments, okay? Again, I've got my methods that exist. You can see that, you know, the idea that I can take my logic out, I can stick it in as these instance methods, makes this very readable. I could look at this and say, okay, well, if a user has the department, what I'm going to have is I'm going to have a delete form, okay? And what this is going to do is that, again, the user has the department, so it's users, the ID of the user, user departments, and this is going to be the user department ID that I'm going to delete. And this was, I purely put that method in as an instance method because I saw, look, I know that there's some logic there. I've got to actually find that user department ID. Again, what causes that? Well, the engineering says you got to loop over all the departments. Okay? A user might have no departments. You can't loop over the user departments. There might be none. You got to loop over all the departments if they have it. You allow that to get deleted. Okay? If they don't have it, and you come down here, you have an else. I did a hidden field here for the department ID. Okay? So in this case, I'm going to do a post. The entity RESTful route is going to be the user. Okay? Nested under a user has many user departments. Okay? Nested under user is the user department. I then have the department ID, and I show the name here, and this is what the post is going to be. And deleting the user, right? No brainer. All you end up needing is the user ID. So again, the important thing, if someone shows you a UI, right, you have to look at that and say, well, how am I getting my data from there? And again, the logic is, hey, look, if for every user, I'm going to show all the departments and differentiate whether they have them or whether they don't have them, right? Then, you know, this is where you are in a position that's going to really tell you. What that's going to tell you is that if you looked at that wireframe, what that's going to tell you is, okay, I need the users, I need to have the user departments, and oh, I definitely need all the departments. Okay? And again, we have the departments anyway because we happen to be showing them on the right, on the left side, on the right side, whichever side it was. Okay? So once you end up doing that, right, I mean, you know, again, we could go in and we could look at, you know, what's left after that. Very little. I mean, you have, you know, we looked at the, you know, the routes, right? The user's routes are slightly more complicated, but really not all that much. The only difference here is that we're dealing with, you know, a post to create a user department. We're doing a delete where we're going to delete a user department. Okay? Again, my take here is that, granted, I can get to the same level by passing a department ID here, but I just feel a little bit better about saying, hey, look, really what I'm dealing with is a user department, and I've got the ID of the user department. And look how simple that query ends up becoming. Okay? So, again, many-to-manys, belongs to, has many. They definitely add a level of complexity to it, but you build a few of these things, you're gonna get that. That's what we're gonna be working on. What we're gonna be working on now. The other just quick thing I'm gonna add and remind me, we'll look at it again at some point, is that not only did I add some testing here, Very, very minimal stuff. And you know something? It's almost foolish not to set it up because, I mean, you have these seed methods that are there that are going to be able to, right off the bat, you have model tests that you can run. So, right over here, I end up grabbing in DB, and I end up seeding my data. And again, I know the way that my data was set up, I could run a quick test to see that the length is going to be 2, that I have 2 departments. And here, if I wanted to go and test some of my methods, and I'm using some ES6 stuff here, but you don't necessarily have to. But here you could go in and start testing out, some of those instance methods if you want to. Again, you already seeded the data, so it doesn't make any sense not to use it. This is fast. This is incredibly fast. I mean, once you have that seed method, okay, you're going to have your data. And again, it's also a pretty common thing that if you're going to do something like this, that your package JSON file is going to have not only a start dev, but also a test dev. And very common to have a different database, and all this is, again, my testing framework, my stack for the testing is going to be, if it's just model testing, it's just going to be Mocha and Chai. But if I want to actually start testing my routes, again, this is why I ended up separating my app into a separate file. And you've seen this, and we'll see it again. But here, the idea that you could also test your routes, and I just tested one route that, I'm going to bring in super test. This is my Express application. This allows me to make a GET request here. And again, I go back and forth with putting in the done here, but one of the things you could always do is that if your it method returns a promise, okay, if that promise fails, and it will fail, if any of the expectations fail, you'll end up getting an error. But as long as the expectations pass, this will end up passing. The last thing that I also wanted to show you is that I, ended up going in here. So I have an account set up on Circle CI. Circle CI integrates with, ends up integrating with GitHub. So what you can do with Circle CI is you can say, hey, look, I want you to run my tests. Okay? Every time that a commit ends up going up to GitHub, okay, I want you to run my test. Now, if you didn't have a database, it would be really pretty simple to do. But the fact that you have a database, the question ends up coming up, well, how does Circle CI, set up a database? What database does it use? Well, what's nice about Circle CI is that Circle CI gives you a Postgres database right off the bat. And the only thing that you have to know how to do is that if you look at the package JSON file, notice I've got our test here, because what will happen by default with Circle CI is Circle CI will do an npm install and we'll call test. Okay? And when Circle CI calls test, I have access to a database. I didn't have to do anything. I have access to a database that's provided to me for Postgres called Circle test. And then I basically just end up running my node tests. The only thing that I had to add with Circle CI is that there was one file that it needed to have, it didn't know its node version. For some reason you don't have to do this with Heroku, sometimes you have to do that too. So there's what's called a YML file to actually specify the node version that you're running. I think it's defaulting to a lower level node version. You know what that'll screw you up with? Any of the ES6 stuff. So you'll see those errors. The errors will say like, hey, I don't know what this syntax means or something like that. And this is just another, you've heard of HTML, you've heard of XML. YML is just a very simple data structure where the different objects and nodes are defined by line breaks and tags. So,
And how much is this one?
nothing.
They call it YAML, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. What does that stand for again? You ain't going to get easy markup language or something silly, it's really silly. But again, all it's saying is that underneath machine, you have a node, and each of these are going to be 2 spaces. Again, they'll give you sample files if you sort of want to figure that out. I mean, so the thing is that if I did a build and if I went in here and I changed one of my tests, you know, let's say I went in here, I'm not going to do it, but, you know, let's say I went in here and I said, you know, not to contain Mitch, and I save it, you know, or I worked on it locally and I pushed it, it'll automatically end up pushing up the Circle CI. I think you have to do it right now. It's not imperative that you do it right now. But again, all these things that you're aware that these tools end up existing. Because if you're working with somebody, they want to have some sense that their test suite is passing. They're not going to believe, you know, they're not going to say, hey, look, here's my branch. Hey, Mitch, the test passing? Absolutely. You know? Really? You ran them. Oh, I run them every day. Every time I run them, I'm constantly running my tests. You know, they don't believe that, right? They want to see that they're, you know, they want to see that, you know, they are actually passing, right? So this actually allows you to do, you know, things like that. There's all kinds of tools that you know, companies end up using. They'll end up integrating, you know, these are called a continuous integration. Because sometimes you'll have something where it says, hey, look, if I end up, you know, with my master branch, if I make a change, okay, it goes up to GitHub. But if my tests fail, I don't deploy. My tests end up passing, I end up deploying. And again, the rules could get more complex than that. But this is what it falls under the category of these third-party continuous integrations. So you have a third party that, very often you have a third party that's doing deployment. You're not setting up your own servers somewhere. So you have some third-party deployment, whether that be AWS, whether that be DigitalOcean, whether it's Heroku, and you have some third-party tool that you're using for, you know, continuous integration.
And that's what CI stands for.
Correct.
Since you got into this other product, when you were putting if you put your workshop or this project out on Heroku, and you have to set up a database, what do you have to do that's different?
It's the same thing. I mean, I think I showed you before that when you're putting this up on Heroku, the only thing is, so again, what's happening here is that I've got basically these 4 settings. I mean, it's a good question. If I look over here on my package JSON file, I'll see that there's going to be 4 settings here. Or let's be more clear, not 4 settings. 4 scripts. I have 3, okay? There is a 4th one that comes with the automatically, which is start, and this is what happens with Heroku. When you deploy to Heroku, it does npm start. npm start runs node server.js, okay? So these, in terms of setting things up on Heroku, this will tell you that when you are deploying your application for all these things, we're expecting a database URL. And again, we didn't name it here for nothing. The reason why we named this is that when we, by default, when we end up provisioning a Postgres database on Heroku, just by saying add on Heroku, it will automatically create an environment variable for database URL.
So you don't have to do anything other than that.
I don't have to do anything other than that. And really, for deployment, I really didn't have to do anything. These are just in all my other environments. All right, let me stop this recording, and then we're going to talk about some interesting stuff.